let's start with my first slide. There we go. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to come. Let's see if this works. Yes. Okay, hold on. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm going to be talking a lot about reprioritizing transportation resource allocation, investments in roads, space, and money. And I'm going to talk a lot about walking. Walking is the most fundamental form of transportation, and virtually everybody walks or uses pedestrian facilities. So let me show you a walk. Up. What is, maybe this? Oh, nope. Okay, well, maybe, oh, there we go. Okay, this is my front porch, and I'm walking down the street. If you, this is Fernwood in Victoria, British Columbia. And we walk a few more blocks, and if anybody's familiar with it, this is Vic High, our local high school. And you can walk through the pitch and get to one of my favorite destinations, which is a pub. This is our local pub. Notice also that it's surrounded by some other businesses. It's a little commercial center right there. It's the legacy of when Victoria had a streetcar system, and this was one of the stops. And that kernel, that the streetcar stop, created this little commercial district, which includes a pub. Now, tell me, if I'm going to my local pub, is it good that I should be able to walk to it rather than have to drive? Tell me. Yeah? Why? Why is it better that when somebody goes to visit a pub, that they should walk rather than drive? Well, okay. Yeah, I'm getting some exercise so I can consume more beer, right, without getting fat. I am not contributing to traffic congestion. Notice this street is, it's a little, the pub is on a 2-lane street. If everybody going to that pub needed to drive there, you would need to expand that road and add more parking to accommodate those people who drive. But because it's a neighborhood pub, and many people get there without a car, it does just fine with just 2 lanes. Anything else? No emissions. And it costs me a lot less, so I can afford more beer. Okay? And what's the obvious additional co-benefit of people walking to pubs? They're not driving home. So how you get to the pub, of course, or how you get to a bar, or how you get to a restaurant, pretty much determines how you're going to get home. So there are many benefits to make sure that when people want to go to a pub or a bar or a restaurant and do some drinking, or just eating, that we allow them to do that without needing to drive. Does that make sense? Okay, we can all go home now because that is my lecture. That is a specific example. A specific example of the benefits to both the person that's traveling, the traveler, and equally to their community of creating a transportation system, a transportation and land use system where it's easy to get around without driving, and particularly for certain types of trips, like going out to drink. Okay, what are the components that allowed me to get there? There were sidewalks. You look at this is an older neighborhood, a pre-1950s neighborhood, when virtually all streets, urban neighborhoods that were built at that time, virtually all the streets had sidewalks, and most of the streets are these narrow 2-lane streets that it's a grid of streets that allows you to many routes, and so if one street is blocked off, you can walk on another. Some nice trees, so it's pleasant. Okay, so that's the infrastructure. Does that cost a lot? Does it cost a lot to build sidewalks and plant some trees? No. Compared, as we'll see, compared with the cost of accommodating a bunch of people driving, so building enough road capacity and subsidizing parking at every destination, this is actually quite affordable. And it's also affordable to me. Our family, because we live in a walkable neighborhood and we're healthy, our family has been car-free for the last 15 years. We don't need a car. Okay, so I'm going to be, let's see, there. Okay, so I'm going to be referring to some of these concepts as we go along. Let me also introduce another concept, and that is sustainable transportation planning. Let me ask you this. Would we have a sustainable transportation system if everybody drove electric Hummers? No. Why not? Why not? Yeah, okay, well, I address this systematic, this controller, okay, electric power doesn't reduce traffic congestion. It doesn't reduce the cost of building roads and parking facilities. It doesn't reduce the overall cost to the household of owning and operating a vehicle. It doesn't improve mobility for non-drivers. It doesn't increase safety. In fact, to some degree, it makes it worse. It doesn't improve social equity or physical fitness and health or reduce sprawl. It does reduce some emissions. I'd rather, if you're going to drive a Hummer, get it electric rather than a gasoline. But overall, we, that is the travelers and the communities, are better off if we have diverse travel options, so we use each mode for what it does best. We are walking and bicycling for local errands. We're using public transit when we travel on busy urban corridors, and we only drive when it really is the most efficient mode for that trip. Okay, so there's a framework that I like to use where we identify our planning objectives. What are we trying to achieve? And you could sit down and think about what factors should we consider in evaluating a transportation planning decision. We want to reduce traffic congestion. We also want to reduce roadway costs and parking costs and consumer costs and improve safety and reduce emissions and energy consumption. And we want to support some of our land use, our strategic land use goals. We want to improve public fitness and health. How many of these objectives, these strategic planning objectives, are we achieving when we widen a roadway? Well, at best, we're getting some reduction in traffic congestion. It usually is temporary. I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But that's what transportation agencies, for example, there are some plans to spend $750 million partly to expand Route 90. And what's the justification? Reducing traffic congestion. Okay. Now, if we get people to drive electric or super efficient cars, how many of these planning objectives are we achieving? Well, we're some emission reductions and energy conservation. But what happens if we apply transportation demand management and smart growth policies so people are driving less and relying more on walking and bicycling and public transit? How many of the objectives are we achieving? Virtually all of them. And just in case you're wondering what these are, transportation demand management, incentives to use efficient modes, and smart growth, creating those compact neighborhoods like we used to be the standard type of neighborhood before 1950, where you were pretty much guaranteed that there was an elementary school within walking distance and some shops, and so your household didn't need a car. Okay, this is an interesting thing to think about right now because we are at an inflection point in terms of travel activity. In the 20th century, automobile travel, that's the per capita automobile travel, which is the green line, it grew almost steadily from 1900, there were virtually no cars, 1900. And then, you know, cars came along, Henry Ford built his factories, Standard Oil started selling this stuff, and we built a bunch of roads, and we imposed parking minimums in our zoning codes to make sure that everybody could find a parking space at their destination. And all that happened, and it grew steadily through the 20th century. But early in the 21st century, in about 2004, per capita automobile travel peaked pretty much everywhere in the developed world that we have good data. Now, you can exclude Canada. This happens to be US data because Canada is really bad at collecting these data. But I have travel surveys from various Canadian cities, and it shows the same pattern, that during the last 15 years, per capita vehicle travel has peaked in virtually everywhere we know, and walking and bicycling has increased, and public transit was increasing until this little pandemic came along. And then public transit ridership declined a lot, but it's starting to recover in most communities. What this says to me as let's say a transportation planner or a policy analyst, is that there's an increasing justification for multimodal transportation planning. That is, in the past, a transportation agency, let's say your Ministry of Transportation or your traffic, the Winnipeg engineering department, they could kind of reasonably say our priority is to accommodate that growth in automobile travel. Now, I think they overshot their mark, but I mean, it did make sense. People were buying more cars and driving more, and there were some benefits from that. But what happens when we saturate that market? What should we do? What should transportation agencies do now? And what my research suggests is that there's a very strong justification for taking resources that were previously dedicated to expanding roads and subsidizing parking, and instead invest that in multimodal transportation so that people can use each mode for what it does best. Okay, and there's you could say a fairness component of this, because in any community, a significant number of people, say 20 to 40% in a typical community, either cannot drive or should not drive or prefer not to drive. Raise your hand if you have a pet dog that needs to be walked on public sidewalks, at least occasionally. Okay. This is actually, you see, the national data suggests about 20% of households. This looks like about 30% of households. You're a bunch of dog lovers here. Should we make sure that our neighborhoods are designed for safe canine pedestrian travel? Is that important? Yeah. That is a component. There are people, maybe they drive to work, but you ask them where our transportation dollars should be spent, and they would say, well, I want to be able to walk my dog. Give me a good sidewalk and safe crosswalks. Okay, so this justifies, the canine transportation planning, that's a very small component. There are a lot of other things you could talk about. What about aging in place? You know, my hair is gray, I'm getting old. I'm hoping that I live a long time, but hopefully my future self, 10, 15, 20 years in the future, will be wealthy and healthy, and I can get around easily. But is there a chance that my future self will have a disability and be in a wheelchair, or that I'll be so poor that I couldn't afford a car? What about you? Do you want your community to accommodate your future self with the possibility that your future self will need sidewalks that accommodate wheelchairs and need public transit with wheelchair lifts and be designed so that there's affordable housing, accommodates wheelchairs within a 5-minute roll of a supermarket? is that is it reasonable to say that most of us want to ensure that our community is prepared for our future self, which includes the possibility that we're going to need wheelchair access, or a walker, or be impoverished? Okay, so that's actually a component of this. Even if you are a selfish motorist and you're currently saying, I need to be able to drive, you also have selfish reasons to say, I want my community to prepare for my future self. Okay. Okay, there we go. So this is what it looks like. You know, if you're a motorist, you say, I want my share of transportation dollars and road space to be devoted to roads, drivers. But if you're a non-driver, you're a pedestrian, you say, I want my share to be spent on sidewalks and crosswalks and other pedestrian facilities. And a bicyclist says, I want my bikeways. And a transit user says, I want my share to be spent on public transportation, high quality public transit, frequent, comfortable, affordable, nice shelters. Okay, so this multimodal transportation, it's really about responding to what people want. There's a myth or a narrative where critics say, oh, this is a war on cars. This is a bunch of environmentalists and a bunch of progressive people forcing people to give up their drive. You know, people want to drive and we're going to take that away. But no, in any community there are a lot of people who either cannot, should not, or prefer not to drive, a lot of travelers, and so responding to everybody's needs requires multimodal transportation. Okay, so we could say a sustainable transportation hierarchy. We're favoring the resource-efficient modes. Now this is what it kind of looks like if you think about it from a community planning perspective. The older neighborhoods in the center of the city, let's see if this works. What have we got here? Okay, the older neighborhoods, they are compact and multimodal, and so it's easy to get around without a car. The smaller towns, if you have a town of, let's say, 10,000 people or more, and it can support a supermarket and an elementary school, you've got pretty good, reasonable access. You can get around without a car. It's not going to be quite as easy as down here. But if you live in a sprawled, automobile-dependent area, you're pretty much forced to use a car for almost every destination or every trip. So if you're concerned about affordability and efficiency and inclusivity and making sure that everybody's served, one of the ways to think of it is you want to make sure that anybody who wants, any household, any family that wants, can find suitable housing in one of these high accessibility neighborhoods. And that means there are a number of factors to consider. You could ask how many jobs can be reached within 30 minutes, and you could measure the disparity between the jobs accessible by car and the jobs accessible without a car within that time period. You could ask, how long does it take to reach shops, especially a supermarket? How safe are walking and bicycling? How close and frequent is transit? Can children walk or bike to schools and neighborhood shops? What are the costs of getting around? Is there a pub within walking distance? Can a family live car-free? How easy is it to find information? For example, as a visitor to Winnipeg, if I arrive at the airport and I wanted to take a bus downtown, is it going to be easy for me to find the information I need and to be able to add money to get one of your bus payment cards? No. Those are little frictions that certainly affect our ability to get around. Okay, what's going on here? For some reason, it's not working again. Did I turn it off? Is there a chance I've turned it off? Could somebody, you just forward it. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so another indicator is walk score. Interesting thing about walk score is it really doesn't measure walkability. It measures land use mix and density. It measures the proximity between activities and highlights areas where you've got good shops and services and pubs and coffee shops. This is another way to say that if you want to maximize transportation efficiency, you should make sure that anybody who wants can find housing in the green areas, the areas that are very compact and walkable. Next slide. Okay, so we use various terms for this: new urbanism and smart growth and neo-traditional neighborhoods. But I happen to like the term urban villages because it just sounds friendly. And you know, we like the idea of a village. A village is by definition the neighborhood area that you can walk to and where you're likely to interact with your neighbors. That's a good village. And so what does it take to create a village? Well, you need a sufficient population basically to support the businesses and things like elementary schools. And so that means at least 5,000, probably better if it's 10,000 people, all within a walking distance. You need the development density and mix, so things are within walking distance. You need complete sidewalks and crosswalks and paths and universal design, which means that all these facilities accommodate everybody, including people in wheelchairs and parents pushing a stroller and your Amazon delivery person with a hand cart and people walking their pets. Which means it isn't just about having sidewalks and crosswalks. It means you need low traffic speeds. So, you know, transportation engineers, they rate streets they have a rating system called level of service, and it's from A, which is excellent, to F, which is failure, just like elementary school grades. And from their perspective, wider roads with higher traffic speeds are better. What about a pedestrian's perspective? Is a wider road with higher traffic volumes and faster traffic, is that a connector or is that a barrier? From a pedestrian's perspective, everything that the traffic engineers are doing to facilitate faster driving is creating barriers to people walking. So if you want a good urban village, the village should have virtually no roads with more than about 30 km/h speeds. You want all of the streets within that area to be walkable, to be friendly. Okay, public transit, attractive streetscapes, perceived security. You want your neighborhood to feel safe. By the way, what's one of the best ways to make a street feel safer? Eyes on the street. This idea of having some sort of a storefront with housing above, and so you've got people activating that street. That's the way we describe it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so one of the challenges that we face is that a lot of transportation planning creates self-fulfilling prophecies. If you say we need better roads to the school so that more parents can drop their children off by car, because you're degrading walking and bicycling conditions, you're making that happen. You're forcing more parents to drive their children to school because they don't feel safe allowing Junior to walk or bike to school. Next slide. Okay, so there are wonderful programs, safe route to school programs, to try that make neighborhoods better for walking and bicycling. And in fact, Winnipeg has had safe routes to school programs, right? And what portion of schools have these kind of programs? And is it growing or declining? Now, I'm an outsider, so I can't tell you for sure, but what I heard is that it was one of these things that got a lot of enthusiasm and then has pretty much declined. And that a minority of schools have this investment. And I would argue that this gives you one of the highest returns on investment, is making sure that any child that wants to arrive, to get to school by walking and bicycling, or by public transportation for some trips, should have that opportunity. It should be safe and convenient. One wonderful example happens to be Paris, where they're systematically closing the streets in front of the schools and turning them into play streets. And so of course, some parents are going to drop their kids off, but they have to drop their kids off a block away, and the kids walk the last bit. Keep this in mind. I'm going to mention this in a future slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so traffic engineers, they sometimes think about programs, but mostly they think about facilities. So if you want more multimodal transportation planning, you want to be able to walk and bike and use public transit. If you want to talk to the traffic engineers, they're accustomed to thinking of each of those modes individually. They'll say, oh yeah, we'll have to establish a walking program. And we're going to have to establish a bicycling program. And we're going to have a public transit program. But the truth is, we usually plan things as facilities, a road. And so Complete Streets says we're going to make sure that all roads are designed to accommodate all modes. And that, in a lot of situations, well, it means that you prioritize sidewalks, that every street should have sidewalks. And a lot of streets should have bikeways, and some streets should have busways, bus priority. And you make sure they're beautiful. You are concerned about the what you could call the public realm, that it's attractive. Let's put it this way. A lot of street uses are not traveling. They're the street as a place. Think of a coffee shop that spills out. It's got tables out on the sidewalk. Think about kids playing. They're not traveling. They're playing along the street. Think about, hockey games are the Canadian classic example. Think about somebody who's walking their dog. They're not concerned about speed. They're concerned about the quality of the place. Okay, next slide. So let's do a little example of what this could look like. This is your typical urban fringe street that was designed for cars, and for decades nobody paid it any attention, and it got ugly. Okay, let's see what we can do. By the way, I want to give credit. This series of slides was created by my friend Dan Burden, who's famous as a walkability advocate. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so let's say the municipal government invests $10 or $20 million to make it to improve sidewalks and bikeways, and put in a bus shelter and a bridge that crosses over that busy, what could be a railway, or it could be a river or a highway. Okay, next slide. And then you upzone. You say this is where we want to target a bunch of new development, and you want active streets. So you're putting in that commercial with storefront, with residential above, so you have people working and living and shopping all in the same place, and it becomes a human-oriented space. Next slide. And you green space it. Next slide. And what happens is you keep getting more development. It becomes an attractive place that creates, that's attractive and creates value. Now, let's go back to where it was at first. There. How much property tax revenue, how much money does the government get from this land use? How much rent, or how much property tax do you pay on a parking lot? Do they create much value? No. I mean, they're a utility, they have a function, but they are not very valuable in themselves. Go back to the last slide. Okay, that, let's say $10 to $20 million worth of infrastructure investment can leverage hundreds of millions of dollars worth of efficient development. And let me emphasize a point. I'll come back to this, but a lot of people want to live in this kind of walkable, mixed-use area because they can live car-free. This is the kind of place where you can be comfortable living. Let's say if you can't afford a car, or you're in a wheelchair, or you just don't want the expense of a car. So there is value here. It's an invisible value, but people understand it, that this is where you could live car-free, and so you can afford to spend a little bit more on rent because of all that money you're saving on transportation. Next slide. Okay, so that brings us to affordability. There was a survey, I don't show it on the slide here, but there's this interesting survey where they asked transportation users their priority for transportation improvements. You know, what are the problems that they want solved? Do you think traffic congestion came up at the top? No. What was the top? Affordability. Saving money was the highest priority it was a US survey, the National Household Travel Survey. Is that surprising to you? Are there many people, let's flip this question. Are there a lot of people for whom traffic congestion is such a problem that they say, yes, raise my fuel taxes. I want to pay twice as much as what I'm paying now, so I have twice the road space, so I have less traffic congestion. Do you know anybody that would vote in favor of doubling fuel taxes in order to finance more congestion reduction?
One guy.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. When you ask people to make trade-offs between, let's call it speed or congestion reduction and affordability, typically 10 to 30% of people will pay a premium for reducing traffic congestion, for driving faster, but the majority would rather save money rather than time. Next slide, please. There's good research showing if you live in a more multimodal community, a community with good walking and bicycling and public transit, your household on average spends less on transportation. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is particularly important for people with disabilities, so you could say there's a social equity justification. You could say that to ensure that everybody can participate in our transportation system, you want to make sure that both the transportation system serves them, that is, you've got sidewalks and crosswalks and bikeways and public transit with lifts, but also that you have compact neighborhoods so that you wouldn't need, if you're a wheelchair user, you don't need to wait for a transit to take a bus to go to a shopping center, that you can live within an easy roll of your supermarket. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's put Winnipeg's traffic congestion into perspective. How bad is congestion here? Yeah, not bad at all. Compared with other cities, you're doing fine. It just isn't much of a problem. And there's no evidence to suggest that it's going to become a problem. There's no fundamental changes in the transportation demands that says that 10 years from now or 20 years from now that there's going to be significantly more driving going on. You've pretty much saturated the market. That's what my research suggests. Next slide, please. If you do want to reduce traffic congestion, there are some effective solutions. One is, or the most important, is to improve the space-efficient modes, improve walking and bicycling and public transit. Think about if you don't do that, and a bunch of parents have to chauffeur their children to school. So, you've got a school, it's just a kilometer away, but you've got these busy roads between your home and the school, you've got lousy crosswalks, lousy sidewalks, so you drive your kid to school. What does that do for traffic congestion? Well, twice a day, you're driving to the school and you're driving home. You're generating 2 trips. So you're transporting the kid 1 kilometer, but you're generating 2 kilometers of vehicle travel twice a day. That is contributing to traffic congestion. Next slide, please. Okay, so anyway, improving walking and bicycling and public transit, it turns out that reduces traffic congestion. It's also creating a safer community. Traffic safety, as traffic crashes decline. This graph, each dot, each square or diamond is a US state, and you're looking at the relationship between deaths per 100,000, traffic deaths per 100 population to annual vehicle kilometers per capita, or vehicle miles. What this shows is the states where people drive a lot are also the states with the highest traffic fatality rate. That sounds negative. How can we turn that into a positive statement? Yeah, the places that invest in walking and cycling and public transit and have more compact development, so people are driving less, are safer. And it's not just a little bit safer. We're going from 5 traffic deaths per 100,000 population to more than 20. 5 times as much, or 4 times as many traffic deaths per capita. Next slide, please. Okay, so one way to think of this is to look at the traffic deaths per trip or per billion passenger miles for different forms of transportation. Despite the frequent fears, it actually turns out public transit is far, far safer than driving. It's just that when there is a public transit, a bus or a train crash, it gets far more attention than people dying in cars. Individual car crashes, that's third-page news, where a bus getting into a crash, even if nobody is seriously injured, still is front page. It's dramatic. And the same with crimes. Road rage incidents where somebody's injured or killed in a traffic dispute, and car thefts and car vandalism are far more common than public transit crimes. But public transit crimes tend to get a lot more attention, which is not to say it's unimportant, that we don't want to make transit safer. But what's the most important way to make transit safer? Increasing ridership by non-criminals. How many people here are criminals? Okay, and so we want everybody else to use public transit more, so that because it's a self-patrolling, self-reinforcing safety. Next slide, please. Okay, and this just shows that if you live in a smart growth community where people don't drive as much, you have much lower traffic fatality rates than sprawled communities. Next slide, please. We could also, there's also good research showing that people who live in more compact housing, in more compact communities, have much lower energy consumption and pollution emissions, especially with regard to transportation, but also single-family houses are more energy intensive than the same floor area, the same amount of house in a compact housing type. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about economics, because it's often, unfortunately, it's often framed that, oh, this is, multimodal planning is good for the environment, but it's bad for the economy. Absolutely not true. It's true, what is true is that between, this is 1950 to about the year 2000, that there was a pretty strong correlation between vehicle miles traveled, VMT, and gross domestic product, GDP. But about the year 2000, it decoupled. So, next slide, please. When somebody says we need to widen this road for the economic benefits, that's the last century's or that might have been true during the 20th century, but it's no longer true. In fact, this graph shows the relationship between GDP per capita, so this is an indication of economic productivity, and VMT, vehicle miles traveled per capita. Somebody that's taken a course in statistics interpret this graph. What does this tell us? If you live in, let's see, each of those represents a US state. If you live in a US state with lower vehicle miles traveled, what do you get? You tend to get more productivity, economic productivity. Next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of the same relationship with regard to road lane miles. So the amount of road space per capita. And this also shows the states with more urban lane miles tend to have less productivity than the states with more urban lane miles. Building more urban highways certainly does not increase economic productivity, and it's negatively associated. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a positive relationship between economic productivity and transit ridership. Next slide, please. And this is what I suspect this is what we're really looking at. And this is the relationship between GDP and urban densities. So what this is suggesting, what I think is going on, is that the denser, more urban areas are much more economically productive. It's what we call economies of agglomeration. Many industries are just more productive if they're located in a city, and a compact city, than if they're located isolated in a sprawled area. There's a lot of research suggesting it. And so what allows that to occur is multimodal transportation and compact development, mixed-use development. Those are all very, very good for economic productivity. And so when we build more road capacity in cities, we're actually contradicting the goal of creating more compact, more resource-efficient cities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this also shows up if you do this very interesting mapping. This is a version of a heat map that looks at the value, the tax revenue value per acre for a US city. That is Eugene, Oregon. And unsurprisingly, the most productive, in terms of land value and tax value, the most productive are the dense city commercial centers. Well, commercial and residential. If you are the mayor or the city councilor, and you want more efficient tax revenue, you should be encouraging more compact development that allows that higher value to occur. A good example is think about the number of hectares that are required for a big box store, say Costco or Walmart. How much tax revenue do you think you get per hectare from big box stores? It's actually quite low because most of that land is devoted to parking. It's not considered very productive. That same amount of land in a central neighborhood is actually generating far more tax revenue. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's an interesting, this is a little bit esoteric, theoretical, but is money an end in itself? No. What is our ultimate goal? Well, happiness is, some people get happiness from power. So they want power, but if we're smart, we recognize that our ultimate goal is the technical term or the metric we use is life satisfaction. So there's a organization that goes around the world and surveys people and asks them this interesting question. If you imagine a ladder with 10 legs, 10 steps, and we ask you, how satisfied are you with your life, from 10 being ultimate happiness, 0 being your extreme unhappiness, where would you put yourself? And what's interesting is that when you go from extreme poverty, very low areas, to a moderate income, to say $20,000 GDP per capita, yeah, you get a good growth. But once you hit about 20,000, it's actually flat. And the happiest countries tend to have a moderate income, about $60,000 a year GDP, and you actually get a little bit of a reduction when you get to the highest. And it actually makes sense. It turns out, I highlight the US and Canada because we aren't very efficient at maximizing happiness per dollar. There are other countries that have lower GDP or lower incomes where people are happier. And so one of the implications is that, one factor is that people in the happier per dollar areas, they tend to work fewer hours. The United States, in particular, it has a higher GDP, but it's partly because people are working longer hours than in other countries, particularly the European countries, where they, if you've spent any time in Europe, they take these long lunches and they drink wine. And they value things that we have, that in North America we think are, we focus on productivity instead of treating happiness as a goal in itself. Okay, so what would that imply? What are some of the things that implies for our urban planning and transportation? Well, it suggests one thing is we want more affordability, that we should be able to satisfy our needs with less money. We want more affordable housing, we want more affordable transportation. It means that health is important because you can't be happy if you're unhealthy. And preventive strategies tend to be very effective. Community turns out to be an important happiness factor. What kind of a community, what kind of urban design creates a community where you get to know your neighbors? You have a positive relationship with your neighbors. It turns out walkability and having local services, a local elementary school and local parks, and encouraging people to have dogs and walk their dogs. Those all seem to contribute to happiness, to increasing happiness per dollar. Or you could say happiness per kilometer or 1,000 kilometers driven. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, here's Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, Netherlands, Costa Rica, Norway, Israel, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Belgium, Ireland, Lithuania, and Austria all have more happiness per dollar than in Canada. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about a few strategies for improving, let's say, our health and happiness, our economic productivity. One of the first is to allow more infill development. And you've already done a little bit of this, if I understand, upzoning a little bit, so you can now build, let's say, a 3-story, or let's say a townhouse in more neighborhoods. Is that true? And are you thinking about eliminating parking minimums so somebody that doesn't own a car is no longer forced to pay for a parking space they don't need? Is that true here in Winnipeg?
Will it into existence?
Yeah. Okay, and what about allowing accessory units so you can turn your garage into a little apartment? Is that allowed?
Yes.
In all neighborhoods? Okay. So you're doing some of this. What about this beautiful 4-story apartment building? Actually, it's a condo. Would that be allowed? If you could assemble, let's say, 2 or 3 single-family housing units in one of your neighborhoods, could you build a 4-story, 25-unit apartment building there? Yeah, probably not. It turns out this is the most affordable type of housing to build. What we call mid-rise, so 3 to 6-story apartment buildings, wood frame. That on the affordability per square meter of house tends to be lowest for these. So if you want a lot of affordable housing, infill, this is the type of housing you probably want to allow. Next slide, please. What aren't we doing? Well, this graph shows the amount that a typical community. Now, we don't know about Winnipeg, but in a typical community, most communities are spending about $100 a year per capita on sidewalks and bikeways. Does anybody know, is that appropriate? Is that about accurate for Winnipeg? Okay. And usually that is, the expenditure is actually by property owners. Most cities do not actually build sidewalks. They simply require property owners to add sidewalks when certain types of development occur. And so, which explains why a lot of sidewalks are incomplete. You've got a gap because that property hasn't been developed, or it was developed so long ago, it wasn't required. And so, but anyway, it's, regardless of the mechanism, it's a relatively small amount of money. We spend somewhere around $200 to $300 a year per capita subsidizing public transit, compared with about $1,000 a year we spend that governments spend, all levels of government spend on roads, and about $2,000 a year that businesses have to spend to provide off-street, government-mandated off-street parking. But every time I suggest that there should be more investments in walking and bicycling facilities, people say, oh, but we can't afford that. Why is it? Why is it that it seems expensive to put more money into sidewalks and bikeways than what we're currently spending on especially roads and parking facilities? Well, the Ministry of Transportation has a budget. They don't need to go to the government every year to ask for more money. They have a pretty predictable revenue stream, and it's simply where the question that the ministry has to answer is, where should we spend this money? But they don't have to go begging for money. Where if you were to ask for more spending on sidewalks, you would need to find a new revenue stream. So it's an institutional bias in favor of, and the off-street parking spaces, those are just hidden costs. They are imposed on developers, on property owners, and the government never sees that money, so it never shows up in an account. It's just an additional cost for development. Okay, so to me, this is the real barrier that you face for creating a safe and efficient and fair transportation system, is just the funding bias. Next slide. Now let me show you I have a bunch of success stories. In fact, there's a report on our website called TDM Success Stories. And let me just highlight a really nice one, Paris. How many here would like an excuse to visit Paris? Okay, you have my permission. You got to start working on your French. It turns out 10 years ago, well, 15 years ago now, Paris elected Anne Hidalgo on a platform of sustainable transportation. And under her leadership, the city of Paris invested a lot more money in sidewalks and bikeways and put in some bus lanes and removed some on-street parking and did a whole bunch of things. And remember, there was a slide about safe routes to schools, and I highlighted the school streets in front of Parisian schools, especially the elementary schools. They've closed it to cars and opened it for walking and bicycling and play. And it's just one of many strategies. And I emphasize that it isn't like there's one thing that you do to create a sustainable transportation system. It's a whole bunch of integrated, connected decisions. Look what happened to the car travel. This is regional automobile mode share. It went from about 45% to about 15%. There are a number of more recent surveys. This actually ends at 2019. That trend has continued. And here's the important thing. the mayor was reelected. When people experience that sustainable transportation system, they love it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I understand you're going to be discussing this Route 90 project, and that's going to be an issue in your election and a bunch of discussion. So let me just show you some slides that I think that I'm trying to frame it. And I may be doing some additional research on that, so you might hear more detailed stuff. But here's my summary of reasons to expand, short-term congestion reductions, and some people would say it's a benefit that it's going to allow more housing to be developed north of Winnipeg. So it would open up. They would describe this in a positive way. We're going to open up that region. But what are the disadvantages? No long-term congestion reduction. Relatively few people will actually benefit, especially over the long term. Mainly those people that want to move out to that opened up area. It doesn't improve freight efficiency over the long run. High unit costs, so it's going to be expensive compared with the benefits. It increases automobile dependency and sprawl. Unfair to the people that don't benefit, particularly people who live in urbanites that don't drive. And other investments are probably far more cost effective. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a bunch of questions that you can start asking. The current proposed budget is $750 million. Is that a lot of money? Works out to be $1,000 per capita per Winnipegian. If you had $1,000 to spend on transportation improvements in your city, would you spend it on expanding Route 90? Is that the project that would get your $1,000? Okay, think about this. I'm introducing these as points of discussion and questions to ask. Okay, expanding roads and increasing traffic speeds degrades walkability. What is this project going to look like from a pedestrian or a bicyclist perspective? To what degree is this self-fulfilling? That we're going to say we need to expand the roads, we expand the roads, and that additional traffic occurs. What would have happened if you don't expand it? Is it really going to create a significant delay and gridlock? And the city has targets to, believe it or not, Winnipeg has terrific plans and aspirations when it comes to transportation. You're fantastic. You have wonderful words on paper. Okay, but to what degree, the target is that by, 2050, only half of all trips in Winnipeg are made by automobile. Okay, to what degree does this support that and other similar targets? Next slide, please. Okay, so here's another way to think of it in terms of sustainability. It does add some greenery. At least the illustrations for the Route 90 have a bunch of green ink in them. And it does have some new mixed-use paths, okay? But what portion of the $750 million is going to that, and how much green space and pedestrian improvements could you achieve for a small portion of that expenditure? The bad things is it expands the roads, very long blocks, and long blocks are really the barrier. If you have to walk half a kilometer to cross this road, that means your total additional trip is a kilometer. That's a huge increase in the distance that you have to and the time you have to travel. Few mixed block pedestrian crossings, high-speed slipstreams, that's the curved streets, no pedestrian orientation. None of the illustrations show the kind of walkable, store-oriented or commercial strips where you would feel safe walking because you've got that storefront and the housing over commercial. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. likely to increase sprawl. No effect on how this, or no analysis of how this affects the strategic goals. Next slide, please. So the most basic principle of good planning is that your individual short-term decisions support your long-term goals. And so you should, the critical, let's say, missing link, or let's say the critical thing to ask and to try and explore when this project is analyzed is to what degree does it support your goals to create more affordable housing and more affordable transportation and increase physical activity and those other targets. Next slide, please. So there are smart solutions. There are ways that you could take a $750 million and probably deliver more benefits to more people by thinking in terms of prioritizing a bunch of small improvements to the affordable, resource-efficient modes. Next slide. I want to emphasize this is not only about Winnipeg. The concepts, even though the details would be different, virtually all of the concepts that I talk about can apply in a suburban area. We call it sprawl repair. And there's a whole literature on how to take suburban, sprawled, automobile-dependent areas and turn them into these full multimodal urban villages. And also, next slide, in rural areas. So there's every reason that rural communities should support improving policies, long-term policies that support more improving walking and bicycling and public transit service. Let me ask you this. What's a town that's, let's say, 50 kilometers north of Winnipeg? What? Okay, whatever that is. Okay, how frequent and affordable is bus service between here and there? There's zero, exactly. Do you think the good people of that town would value, let's say, hourly service? So there's a bus from there to here, to Winnipeg, every hour with, let's say, a $5 maximum fare, and it goes from early morning to late at night. Would those rural residents appreciate that service? Yeah.
Appreciate, yes. Use, no.
Well, I'll tell you, in Victoria, there's a city, it's about 50 kilometers west of Victoria. It's called Souk. And because the guy who was the premier of British Columbia, he represented that riding, he made sure there was frequent and affordable bus service. There are 43 buses a day between Victoria and Souk, and the fare is $3, so it's a standard fare, you're not paying extra, and it carries, the last time we did a good survey, 12% of all trips and 22% of peak period trips. It turns out there are a lot of rural residents who would like to rely on walking or public transportation if it is frequent and affordable. Let me ask you this. Are there some people who live in that region that would like to come to Winnipeg to watch a hockey game and drink and be able to take a bus home so that they don't have to worry about drunken driving? Is there somebody there that would appreciate that? Okay. And are there some people that would like to, that can't drive who live up there? Or they drive, but their car is an old beater, and it would cost them $10 in gas each way, and they would like a $5 bus fare? Are there some people there? Are there some parents that are sending their kids to university here that they actually have to make a 100-kilometer or more trip in order to pick them up because there's no bus service? Anyway, I think we're getting late, and I want to make sure there's a little bit of time. Next slide, please. This is my ending slide. Everything, if you're interested in, if you want more information on everything that I said. There are reports, free reports on our website. I have some business cards. You can send me an email. I'll be glad to share my slideshow with anybody who wants it. Do we have 10 minutes for comments and questions? Is that? Yeah. Okay, so I will leave you to MC this. Thank you very much.
Because we only have this one additional mic, we seem to be having some AV issues tonight. If I could ask anyone who wants to ask Todd a question to come over to this side of the room, just so you can use the mic.
Yeah. In fact, why don't we could use this stand here. How's that?
Or do you want to use
You want to switch mics, and so.
Well, you know what, I might even take it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh.
Hi there. We heard quite a lot from the mayor and Councillor Lukes specifically about how we need to build this Route 90 project for economic development, and you talked about decoupling, but you didn't elaborate, like that decoupling that's happened between road miles built and GDP.
Right.
Can you outline some of the things that have led to that decoupling? Because it wasn't apparent.
Right. Well, think of your own life. I don't know anything about you, but the amount of time and money that people want to budget to transportation is finite. An average person spends 60 to 90 minutes a day traveling and doesn't want to spend more than about 15% of their household budget on transportation. That's the constraint. And so there's just only so much driving. During the 20th century, the average speed that cars could travel increased rapidly. So the Model A Ford could only go 20 miles an hour. By 1960, virtually every commercially available vehicle that you bought could exceed the legal speed limit. And so, yeah, average car travel increased from very slow, under 20 miles an hour, to about 60 miles an hour. And then at about 1960, it just didn't get any faster. And now we've got things like telework. So a lot of people are working at home or doing computer shopping or internet shopping or whatever. So there just isn't a reason for people to drive more. And an increasing portion of trips are low value trips because you're trying to decide, should I go shopping, should I drive to the store to go shopping, or should I order it online? And so it's not to say there aren't a certain portion of your trips are very important, but an increasing portion of our trips are lower value and therefore more price sensitive. But the decoupling and the negative relationship between per capita vehicle travel and per capita GDP, to me, my interpretation is that reflects the inefficiency of driving everywhere. That your productivity would increase if you didn't have to waste as much time driving and you didn't have to waste as much of your household budget on buying a car. You could do more. Think of it, an example would be, are there some families where they say, I'm afraid we can't afford to send pay our children's tuition because our car just broke down. We need to spend $5,000, fixing our car. Does that ever happen? Are there families that experience a financial crisis that makes them much worse off over the long run? And those are just some examples. In my report, there's a report on our website. There are two reports. One's called the Mobility Productivity Paradox, a paper that I presented at a conference, and a longer study called Evaluating Transportation Economic Development Impacts, and they go into a lot of detail about this. So, to me, it's kind of common sense. Productivity increases with efficiency. And an automobile-dependent sprawled transportation system is literally inefficient. It just takes more resources and more money to deliver that thing called access to services and activities. Okay, let's make sure everybody gets their chance.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Lovely. I'm just going to speak loudly. So I am a person with several disabilities, and I live the life that you were explaining. Like, I'm soon going to be probably a wheelchair user, and there's not really any neighborhoods for me.
Yeah.
If I didn't have like a supportive community with my family, I would completely lose my independence.
Yeah.
And so my question is, with all your research and things like that, how do we push the needle with our actual politicians? Because we could all agree on, like, I loved your presentation, but if none of that is actually going to be enacted, do you have tips?
Well, the starting point is we have to be optimistic. If you start off overly pessimistic, you're discouraging even yourself, much less your other people. So and there are plenty of signs that there are incremental improvements. I mean, for example, the universal design, the requirement that all transportation facilities accommodate all types of users, including wheelchair users, that is actually written in law. The problem is, what that does is it says every time you build a sidewalk, it needs to have ramps and, needs to be sufficiently smooth and wide. Okay, but unless there's additional funding to build sidewalks, it actually reduces the number of kilometers of sidewalks that are built because they become more expensive. And so I think there's a strength in expanding the range of benefits that we describe from something like improving sidewalks and crosswalks. If we say we need to do this for people with disabilities, that turns it into a social equity issue. But if we say it also increases health for everybody and their dogs and saves the government money because you're not having to spend as much money expanding roads and supports local economic development and what were some of the other things? Gives children more independence and parents aren't having to chauffeur. I think by expanding the coalition or the range of benefits that we, and also bring in this issue that, okay, it made sense to build a lot of roads during the 20th century, but what century is this now? It's the 21st. We're the future. We should be planning for more multimodal. One of the things, one of the things I recommend is that everybody involved in transportation decision making should spend at least a day every year using a wheelchair so they experience it, and that the city or the government train and empower the people, wheelchair users or people with disabilities, as the people that sign off on any pedestrian improvements or any transportation improvements that ensures that it meets universal design requirements, and the contractor doesn't get paid until they sign off. So I think there is a way that you could justify this. One last point is the city of Denver. There was an initiative, a referendum in the city of Denver asking, should property owners in Denver be required to pay more? And it turns out it's a little over $100 per property owner to complete the sidewalk network, and it won overwhelmingly. And so now the city of Denver, Colorado has a constant stream of funding for sidewalks. So that's the kind of thing. Now there's a flip side, and that is paying attention to affordable housing. So you should also be advocating that the cheapest type of housing is the 3 to 6 story apartments, mixed use apartments with unbundled parking, so you're not required to pay for a parking space you don't need. And you should make sure the city encourages that type of housing, a lot of that type of housing, to be built in those most walkable neighborhoods. To me, that if I frame that as a survey question and sent it to every, this series of questions that I sent to all the candidates, all the city council candidates, if nothing else, it's a learning, it's a teaching experience to those candidates. It's about how to create a truly inclusive community, including people with disabilities, but it also benefits a bunch of other people, low-income people and families with kids. It might force some candidates to commit. You might be able to get some commitments for a package of transportation improvements. Good luck.
Hello. So near the end, you touched upon providing meaningful public transportation, transit, etc., to rural communities.
Mm-hmm.
You listed the reasons why that's important. Do you have any high-level technical advice for how to deliver this service, considering all the limitations of rural, lack
Sure.
of density, greater distance?
Sure. So I'm working on this in British Columbia. I'm a president of an organization called Better Island Transit, and we're trying to get more frequent service. It's not technically difficult. In fact, until 20 or 30 years ago, private companies, Greyhound and Trailways, used to deliver interregional service, bus service. And I do prefer coach buses because they've got storage, they got abundant storage and they got washrooms and, they're designed for those long trips. So, but the problem is automobile dependency came along, and so fewer people were taking buses for long distance trips, and that created what we call a doom cycle. And so now it will require some government subsidy. It's a tiny amount. I do the study for British Columbia. It turns out the Ministry of Transportation in British Columbia spends about $5 a year per capita on interregional bus service, compared with $1,000 a year per capita on highways. And the government spends, other agencies spend about $200 a year subsidizing public transit, so local public transit. So there are a couple things. One is I would frame it as I would get the rural communities to become the advocates, because a rural vote, it just so happens, rural votes tend to be worth about 50 to 100% more than an urban vote. Urban ridings or rural ridings tend to be smaller population, so they're worth more. So if you could mobilize, if you could organize the rural communities to make this a big issue in upcoming elections, or simply to go to your Ministry of Transportation and say, you're not being fair to rural communities. You're being fair to rural residents who drive, but you're being grossly unfair. You're not recognizing the need of rural residents. You can also frame it in terms of, or let's just say, there are in some communities, it's a matter of getting two existing transit agencies to just build a connection. So it's possible you could create it just by convincing the transit agency of Winnipeg and, I don't know, some other city to make an arrangement. So there's a report on my website called a Business Case for Improving Interregional Bus Service, and it has some information. Send me an email if you want more detailed information. Yeah.
The statistics that you're providing are compelling, or at least they should be,
Mm-hmm.
but they're compelling for rational actors.
Yeah.
In particular, with apologies to certain people in the room, our politicians are not what most of us would define as rational actors. They're driven by what non-politicians would generally consider to be perverse incentives.
Yeah.
Where's the, for lack of a better word, socioeconomic research into how can we make this sexy?
Well, I agree. It's even worse than that, because we're also seeing the effects of what we call elite bias. and that is that virtually everybody involved at the high level decision making of how to spend money and how to design roads are motorists, are busy professionals who drive most places. I mean, there are some wonderful exceptions. Some of my best friends are bicycling traffic engineers, but for the most part, the policymakers are middle class, busy professionals who themselves perceive the problems facing motorists and the benefits of improving driving, and they don't struggle day to day to afford cars or transit fares, and they aren't in a wheelchair. Okay, so it's kind of understandable that this bias exists. I agree, we need to tell stories. We need to find the arguments that are vivid and emotional. One of the reasons I keep coming back to fairness. Fairness results in visceral response. If you say that is unfair, people will respond. If you want talking about aging in place, the issues that resonate with people. I totally agree that statistics don't persuade; they might reinforce, but we need to get good at telling stories. I actually wrote a blog, posted on Planetism about 6 months ago, called "For Better Transit, We Need Better Stories," and it makes exactly that point. We need to translate those statistics into something that is persuasive. I would say we have a terrific product. Improving walking and bicycling in public transit. It is affordable. It is healthy. It is fun. It is sociable. It is good for the environment. It's good for your local economy. It's all these wonderful things. If I was Don Draper, I would love to have that job of selling this stuff. I think we've done a poor job, and part of the failure is that in promoting this, too often we lead with environmental benefits. So we say we've got to get people to drive less and rely more on walking and bicycling and public transit to reduce our climate emissions. And for maybe 20% of the population, that is a top priority, and they say, yeah. But the other 80%, they're not going to be persuaded, and in fact, some of them will be skeptical if we frame this primarily as an environmental solution. But if we talk about affordability or reducing your chauffeuring burdens, taking your kids around, or it supports local economic development. Let me ask you this. How many oil wells are there in Winnipeg? Do you see any oil wells? No. Car manufacturers? No. Refineries? No. Do you have some good pubs? Yeah. Nice restaurants? Yeah. Do you have, so the things associated with walking and bicycling, people going out for a walk and getting hungry and thirsty, those you can produce locally. The money they spend on cars and fuel, what my research shows is that creates fewer jobs and less business activity. So a component of this is getting the Chamber of Commerce to recognize that multimodal transportation planning and compact development is actually really good for business. I can show you the research supporting this, but it's going to be up to you to build that coalition. Do you think it's possible? Is it possible to build a coalition?
One thought to that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the bias of the elites. The one thing that would make me take transit every single day and leave my car at home every day is if I could get to work faster.
Yeah, yeah.
And with rail, I totally could.
Sure,
In
sure,
Winnipeg,
sure.
Takes 3 times as long. So,
Sure.
I can't afford that much time in my day.
Yeah, yeah.
Hence, I'm not part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I was going to actually ask a similar question about the decision-making of our city council here in Winnipeg, because
Yeah.
a lot of us have been saying this for a very long time, for decades, what you're saying in your presentation. But the political decision-making ignores
ignores all of that. But there is a logic to their political decision making. It's not completely wacko.
Mhm.
They can, kind of distract or ignore a lot of the research and evidence because there's two things I think that are going on. Is one, big sectors like the Heavy Construction Association, the truckers, the home builders, the developers, that's a constituency.
Mhm.
And that's who is supportive of the councillors that we have that predominate in Winnipeg.
Mhm.
And the second thing is they all do very well from the years of unsustainable transportation land use that we've had in Winnipeg. So to me, that's one of the things that needs to be exposed, is there is this sort of political dynamic that's happening.
Yeah.
The other thing I really wanted you to talk a little bit more about
Mhm.
is sustainable suburbs, or the
Mhm.
smart suburbs.
Yeah.
And in Winnipeg, a lot of the density is going where there's already high density.
Mhm.
And there's an exclusion of a lot of those very low density sprawled out suburbs from the work that's being done, with infill housing and all of that. So that's something else that I think, for a lot of us in the room that are working on active transportation, we
Mhm.
haven't been working closely with the groups that are working on housing,
Yeah.
on social housing, and on housing development.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not a social science or a political scientist, and so I can only tell you my own experience with local policy reforms. I do believe there are opportunities for change. I think I have seen both progressive policymakers and middle of the road policymakers respond to arguments that are well-framed arguments. There is inertia in our thinking where there still are people who truly believe that expanding roads helps increase economic development, and so so your policymakers still make the mistake of believing that yes, improving public transit and walking and bicycling, that's good for the environment but bad for the economy. And I think now is the moment, now is the time in history where some of those people are going to change, are ready to hear, if we can present it well. Let me give you an example. There's an organization called the Congress for New Urbanism. There are probably some members of Congress for New Urbanism here in Winnipeg. Are there? Does anybody know? Okay. They are the professional organizations for people that support smart growth and urban villages. The first developers that apply this, the first developers that do the kind of development that, some of which we showed you here, are considered pioneers, and it's a big deal. And then, after a while, they demonstrate that it's actually more profitable. An example is building a bunch of apartment buildings with unbundled parking around transit. It turns out there are a lot of families that are happy to live without an apartment that has no parking, as long as they're located close to frequent transit service. So you would say, you would find the developer that agrees that it's time to build a lot more affordable housing in the area around along the transit corridor. It's well accepted in theory that you just have to teach the city councilors that it is actually good for the economy, that it is no longer that they are wrong when they say, oh, this is good for the environment but bad for the economy. No, but you can't say it. You need to find the developer. You're going to do better if the environmental groups that are concerned that want people to drive less can partner with the developing community that wants that wants to build that type of housing. So, I mean, that's an example of where I think we could be much more politically successful if we can build those type of coalitions. Similarly, you know, if you're concerned about improving transit service to suburban and rural areas, it's about building that political coalition in those ridings that are going to have a lot of influence. The rural people I talk with, including the Chamber of Commerces in small towns, they understand this. They would love to have. I'll give you an example. Right now, the city of Victoria gets it's got millions of tourists a year. The city of Duncan, which is 60 kilometers north, presents itself as it's the city of totems. They're very, you know, people would love to go visit them. But there is no bus service where you can leave in the morning from Victoria, visit Duncan, enjoy yourself, have some drinks at their pubs and their wineries, and come back. So the Chamber of Commerce in Duncan would love to have frequent and affordable bus service for tourists, not to mention employees and other things. But these are the kind of coalitions. I think they're terrific opportunities to build political coalitions. And we need to find the arguments that resonate with the potential partners. Mm-hmm.
I think we did touch on it just there. But you did invite comments as well as questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, just listening to that last bit about the rural transit. As a downtown resident, I think it would be so cool because a trip to Paris is way out of the question. If I could spend $5 to get to Selkirk, go fishing for the day, check out a restaurant.
Yeah.
Sort of these day trips would be a huge amenity for Winnipeggers. So going both ways, huge benefits. So, and we shouldn't ignore that. So, but, yeah.
Yeah. And nobody bats an eye when you say you need to widen the road to this destination so more tourists can drive there. The bias is that they simply are not analyzing what is the demand for public transportation to get there. So I think, you know, it's up to us, those of us that want change, to be able to frame these issues in a way that transportation professionals understand. So,
yeah, cool presentation.
Thank you. I hope you're able to go fishing soon. Just a second, I gotta.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Wondering if you have any book recommendations for people who want to learn more about like urban villages and active and safe transportation.
Yeah. Well, the good news. Well, for one thing, you could apply for a master's degree in planning here at the university. Where's Richard here? Yes, Richard. Would you like another student? Okay. 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 Let me put it this way. Let me ask you this. Are you a compulsive do-gooder?
Yes, I hope so.
Yes, and are you good at both analytic and artistic activities?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. Are you sometimes frustrated that you have a great idea and you're not seeing it being implemented? Does that frustrate you?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, you would be a perfect planner. So there's a whole world of planners out there that do this kind of thing. So if you're interested, there are websites and organizations that are the Congress for New Urbanism is a professional organization. They've got good materials. The American Planning Association, it's kind of old school, but it's got some good stuff. There are a bunch of young urban activists that have websites and blogs. Offhand, what are some websites with the progressive urbanist troublemakers? Yeah. Okay. So that guy there, you've got a website, right? And a blog and all those things. Okay. So the wonderful thing about planning, people come to planning from lots of different perspectives. There's a bunch of engineers. They're totally, nerdy guys, nerdy people, and they decide to generalize and go into planning. There are a bunch of people with communications degrees, law degrees, art degrees, and then planning. The professional worlds are becoming increasingly specialized. So now you're no longer a civil engineer, you're a bridge engineer, or you're a highway engineer. It's always specialized, which increases the need for what I call the integrative professions, or you could call generalists. People who don't know a lot about one subject, they know a little bit about a lot of subjects. And planning happens to be one of the ultimate integrative professions, which is why I love it so much. And so what more would you advise for somebody that's interested in these issues?
That's great. I think the most important characteristic of a good planning student is curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Are you curious? You did ask a question.
Yes, yeah, okay, then I'll have to get this part, but thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you. I think we're all getting a little tired, so as far as I'm concerned, this is the end, right? Yes. Okay.
30 seconds? Can you take 30 more?
Sure. Oh, you've got a question. I thought you were a...
No, just a comment. I know it's ridiculous I'm a photographer, but I'm connected to this organization, so I know some things. If people are really interested in the rural side of things, the Climate Action Team Manitoba, has done a lot of cool surveying and reports. So if you want to read about, just to get acquainted on the state of rural public transit in Manitoba, go check them out and read the reports. It's all really interesting. That's all I'm saying.
Fantastic. So, yep.
No, did you want to wrap it up? Okay. Well, I guess that's it then. So thanks to everyone for coming out, and thank you so much, Todd, for coming to Winnipeg.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.